Welcome to Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Our requirement to be awed in our entertainment is central to our enjoyment of sport. It is even more impactful when we are in the orbit of talent that is transformational, and even more so when they are so young that they can change the world by the time their career ended. The NHL Chicago Blackhawks drafted a 17-year-old hockey player with the first pick of the draft this year, Connor Bedard. The NBA San Antonio Spurs drafted a sensation from France who will immediately be the tallest player in the league. Golf has seen the rise of Rose Zhang. LeBron James keeps on ticking. Today, we explore the phenom, the talented young athlete that is said to be poised to change the game from day zero. They are ordained, hyped, and given endless opportunity, but they also face great stress, solitude, and impatience. Is age just a number? We will consider this question and more with our esteemed guest, Ben McDonald, Baltimore Orioles announcer and the first pick overall in the 1989 amateur baseball draft. Chris McKendry, ESPN tennis insider, commentator, and host with decades of experience covering the greatest players on the biggest Grand Slam stages. Let's get to class. There is a reason why they describe the air around an athlete who has reached the pinnacle of their sport as rare. It is rare in that they are on top of a mountain where few have reached. It is rare that only through a mix of unique talent, timing, and extraordinary performance does anyone find their feet standing in a place that is only wide enough to fit the space only they occupy. But it is also rare because at such great heights, it is hard to breathe. The phenom is such a talent, but what separates the phenomenon from the convergence of great execution on the field of play and a spectacular moment is that a phenom is placed on that mountaintop before even climbing up to it. Or as my mom would say, he got there without going. The young phenom has exception stenciled across their back, before their name is on a professional uniform, or before we even learn how to pronounce it. They have abilities we marvel at. They may have features that are genetically unbelievable, sometimes with height that already places them in rare air. We are told they are game changers, generational talent, icons, and the future, but often they are just a teenager, battling acne and high school crushes, all while posting up against established mountain climbers in Batman-like figures like the Joker. Even the most astute and experienced athlete has trouble breathing at the apex of a cloud-covered peak. The stress of getting there with handlers, air managers, and rations is one thing, but it's another to stay there, kicking people away on limited oxygen without even room for family or perspective. At certain heights, up could be down, and left could be right. Phenom goes hand in hand with youth, but also with an ordained position on Mount Rushmore that is merely photoshopped on, bypassing the patient hands of time that normally carve it through proof of excellence, not through a head count of followers and jersey sales. There have been many anointed sports messiahs, here to change the game, here to change culture, here to transcend. There is a divinity to how they are perceived, despite their inability to vote or have a beer. Many have lived up to the hype, and many have not, but most have a story to tell of learning how to grow up around the game when their peers were at prom or enjoying their senior year of college. They are left trying to resolve a basic social question that singer Leon Bridges posed: how you get lonely even though you're surrounded by the ones you know. Solitude, greatness, and the arc of time. The phenom. Will they change the game, or will the game push them off the mountain? Either way, mediocrity will not suffice. Well, this is a great honor and great treat to have Ben McDonald with us, the voice of the Baltimore Orioles, but also his story as being a phenom himself, the number one pick overall in the 1989 draft. So I wanted to talk to him and shed some light about that experience. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dougie. Always good to be with you, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, man. Well, look, man, you were a legend and still are in so many respects of a guy growing up watching college baseball, and you were a couple of years ahead of me. And I guess I wanted to understand more about that experience because here you are, the phone call rings, you're number one overall, literally the first pick in the country. And can you take us back to like your feeling then, the reaction, what that was like?
My reaction, I mean, you're thankful, right? But for me, it was more of a relief than it was anything because, I went in 1988, my sophomore year, I go to play summer ball and I'm playing on the Olympic team. And I'm one of the few guys that's going back to school. And so going back to school, I had been kind of touted the number one overall pick before the college season even began. So in a lot of ways, I didn't get to enjoy my junior year of college because I felt like I was always having to live up to, hey, he's going to be the number one pick. He's going to be the number one pick every start. Doug, and I can remember, striking out 12 or 13 guys a game, but giving up 2 runs and pitching a complete game. And some reporters would say, hey, you had an off day today. How'd you give up 2 runs? And so the expectations got to be very hard for me to deal with. Now, all of a sudden, I'm drafted 1-1 overall. And then really the expectations get turned up. All of a sudden, Scott Boras came up with the idea that Ben McDonald was going to get a 3-year guaranteed contract from an amateur status. It had never been done before in the history of the game. So now the expectations are even amped up even more because now not only do you set the record signing bonus, but you got a guaranteed 3-year major league contract where you went and pitched 2 games in the minor leagues and I was in the big leagues. I signed August the 19th of 1989. I'm in the big league September the 1st, 1989, just 11 days later.
Can you talk about the specifics of some of the things that were really stressful? We know the performance side, but just like managing your life, what was that part like?
The good thing for me, Doug, is I went to LSU on a basketball scholarship. Not many people know that. I was a much better basketball player coming out of high school than what I was a baseball player. And so I got to play in the SEC. I got to experience an Elite 8 run in the NCAA tournament, which helped get me in front of a lot of people and in front of big crowds and pressure type situations. I love the pressure type situations. Was it easy? No, it wasn't always easy for me. And I got a million stories that I could tell about my struggles in the big leagues and trying to figure it all out. Skip Bertman, my coach at LSU, called every pitch I ever threw. And I never thought about how to set up hitters or why. And all of a sudden, 10 days after I signed, I'm in the big leagues trying to get the best hitters in the game out, facing Kirby Puckett and Paul Molitor and Wade Boggs and those kind of guys. And I don't have a clue of what I'm doing, man. And so it was a learning process. And those expectations really wore on me really bad early when you're a 21, 22-year-old kid, man. I can't tell you how many nights I went home in a hotel room just like this, beating my head up against the wall, literally crying, trying to figure out why I can't have success at the big league level. It was a very difficult time for me. There was some dark moments. There's no doubt about that. My most fortunate thing was Cal Ripken Jr. And he came to me and took a liking to me for whatever reason he did. I think he saw the pressure that I was under. And, I remember Frank Robinson called me in, Dougie, and my first spring training and said, you're opening day starting pitcher for us, and you got to win 20 games this year if the Orioles are going to have a chance to compete this year. I was 22, first spring training. That's what he told me. And I looked at Frank like, seriously? I don't even know how to pitch up here yet. I don't even know how to use my stuff. And you're telling me I'm good with being opening day starter. That's a lot of pressure, but hey, I'm good with it. But I got to win 20 games? Seriously? First full year? But that's the kind of stuff that was told to me, and then you start trying to live up to those expectations. Then you got to think you got to do more, man. And it snowballed on me.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the pay it forward effect, Cal Ripken Jr. taking you under his wing. You talk about the first round pick this year is right out of LSU as well, Paul Skeens.
Yeah.
And, I guess, have you had a chance to engage him and talk to him and also just other players or pitchers that you saw that you were able to pass down some of the things that Ripken was able to do for you?
100%. It's still the same game. It's just more difficult. Players are much better. I said, there's going to be expectations when you're, like you said, when you're a first pick, there's expectation. When you're 1-1 overall, because there's only one of us every year, the expectations are even ramped up forward. And I told them the same thing that Cal Ripken Jr. told me when I was 21 years old and I stepped foot in the big leagues. He said, let me tell you something. The game's not going to change. It's more difficult. Outwork everybody. Show everybody you're here to win. You be a team player. Play for what's on the front, not on the back. You can't be a selfish player up here. And he said, go out and do your job every day. Work as hard as you can work and outwork everybody. Be the first one here, the last one to leave. If you do those things, the people of Baltimore at the time he was talking about, they'll take to you. They'll love you because of how hard you're going to work. And look, at the end of the day, Doug, you played this game for a long time. I don't have any regrets about my career at all. I wish I could have played longer. I was in at 21, out at 29. I got 9 years in. And just when you're starting to figure it out at 29 years old, it's gone, right? And that's some dark moments that we can talk about too. But I'm thankful. I don't have regrets about my career at all.
We continue with our in-depth look at the pressures placed on athletes labeled as the next great thing. Next on Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Well, Ben, is there anything you would do to take those lessons and broaden them to help out some of these young superstar talented athletes? I mean, whatever sport, it just seems like they could use some more support.
Look, that's a great question, Dougie. When you're a professional athlete and the money that's out there now, there's always going to be expectations, right or wrong. There's going to be expectations to perform. I think that's part of it. I also think, and I think you'll agree with this, some of our athletes are the most mentally toughest people that are out there. But look, mental health is real. We didn't talk about it 30 years ago because I'm sure it was out there, but it just wasn't something that people talked about. It's real today. And my advice for young kids, man, if you need help, if you think you're going down the wrong path, don't be afraid to ask for help, man. It doesn't make you a less of a man, a less of a person to go ask for help.
No, that sage advice, Ben. And I guess, where do you see it going?
I don't think the expectations are going to change. I mean, you're drafted 1-1 overall for a reason. You're drafted in the first round for a reason because you're what they think is an elite talent or going to be an elite talent. Does it always work out? Of course, it doesn't always work out. I don't see it changing, Dougie. I don't. I think there's always going to be expectation. It's just how you deal with it.
Well, Ben McDonald, I really appreciate you educating us, sharing your story on Classes in Session here. We're all wiser. We've learned a lot. I certainly have. And appreciate it. I know I'll see you on the road somewhere, but actually we're in Baltimore this weekend, so we'll catch you then. But
awesome.
I'll
take
catch
care. Up with you, Doug. Always good to see you, man.
Well, very fortunate to have our next guest here in Classes in Session. We have Chris McKendry, a colleague of mine actually, but also many years at ESPN, host, commentator, tennis insider, and done tremendous works on all the Grand Slam coverage through all the majors for tennis and the tennis world. So Chris, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Doug.
Well, Chris, you're such a perfect guest to dive into what we're talking about today. And that is the phenom. We're looking at these young athletes that are kind of preordained, that are, making a splash, often teenagers. And when you talk about tennis, you really think about a lot of the young teen superstars of past and present. And so I just want to start about this effect and what you find to be unique to tennis more than other sports.
Well, I think what's unique to tennis is that it's singular. It's one person, mano a mano on the court. They're all alone. You don't have that team surrounding you. It's unique in that it's just yourself out there.
And that speaks to how it's evolved over the years. I mean, certainly that's been part of the rules of the structure of the sport for a long time. But how do you think the players have evolved since you go back to Steffi Graf and before they were teens? They also reached the pinnacle and sustained it.
Right.
What's different about today and that singularity?
Well, I think it's interesting today in that the sport, both men's and women, it's getting older. You have players playing. I mean, Novak Djokovic is playing brilliant tennis at 36, possibly better than when he was 26. So you have careers lasting so much longer, and you don't see as many teenagers. Now, I say that with the number one player in the world being a 20-year-old, but he was also number one when he was 19, Carlos Alcaraz. And that's why he's a generational talent, a once in a generation, because it is really uncommon now. For the women, I think there's always been a fascination with the teenage phenom, or it's one person and their celebrity. They usually transcend the sport, these young players. Coco Gauff is a great example. I mean, she's the youngest person in, the top 20. And it's been since 2019, Coco Mania. She was a 15-year-old and came through qualifying at Wimbledon. And she's a fabulous talent and a great, great person. You look and you say, wow, that is a perfect superstar. But even still, now the questions are, well, why isn't she winning a Grand Slam yet? So that the pressure is always going to be there.
Well, and one thing that seems to run through a lot of these stories on some of the teen phenoms, and is there are a lot of people pulling you, or a lot of forces pulling you in a lot of different directions.
I think what's interesting with some of these, young tennis phenoms is, the wealth comes at them fast and furiously. And it can be very overnight. It's not like you're a professional athlete and you sign a contract and you have a team around you that, you win one of these tournaments, you're handed $3 million, and for many of them, it can really flip their world upside down a little bit. And I guess like a lot of young professional athletes, I find the dynamic of when the child starts supporting the whole family very interesting. And I think a lot of these young tennis phenoms, some of their, the ones that have had trouble, I think some of it begins right there. It's parents who are very involved and parents who no longer work, and now you're supporting your parents and then the whole family, maybe your other siblings, so that's an interesting dynamic. And the one phenom, and she was a phenom because she won Wimbledon as a teenager, was Maria Sharapova. And I have great respect for Maria, because there came a time, and I think the Williams sisters have navigated this well as well, where they start running their own, they're the boss, right? And I think that must be an interesting split you have to start to make with your parents of, I'm running the team now. I run the shop, right? I'm the boss.
Coming up, how the label of phenom can be detrimental to the development of an athlete's career. We'll be right back on Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session Summer School with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Well, and you've covered so many sports in all your experience. So let's look at the draft even this year. Like NHL, their number one pick, 17-year-old Connor Bedard. You have LeBron James effect. You've seen incredible talent in all these sports, and they're 17, they're 16, they're 18. I mean, what's your through line in terms of what these phenoms are dealing with, and what that common denominator between, because we see it a lot in sports, and there's so much we project onto them, right? They're kind of preordained. They're going to be generational and transformational, and we're going to be there to see it. How have you reconciled how this fits into like all these sports?
I know, the hockey players get me, like when they get off their skates, they take off their pads. I mean, you're right. Like you watch the draft and they're babies, right? I mean, they're baby-faced kids. It's just unbelievable. I mean, I do, in some of these, especially contact sports, I mean, are they physically big enough yet? At 18, 19 years old. So it's the physicality. In tennis, you see that too, the physicality of it. Some of the younger players, you just look and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like you can honestly, it sounds crazy, but you can see a bigger, more mature physical player like pushing a kid around the court. They're just falling behind. And then, like we talk about, then you have to hope these players are developed as professional people, right? And not just a professional, like a physical, but do they have the mental and the emotional? It's like, what do they say? The mental is what they're thinking. And you can be a great, smart player out there and know the shots to hit. Emotional is what they're feeling. And, how do they feel when they get booed, right? How do they feel when the crowd's not on their side? And all of those development things you sort of have to, I look for too. And you just hope they're capable of handling it.
Well, and I guess let's look ahead a little bit, like the future, because so much of the doors broke down around mental health. My father was a psychiatrist. I grew up in New Jersey, and I always had a sensitivity to that. And I've seen so many athletes, Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, and more and more talking about it, sharing it. But it has a different context to the teen mind, right? That's just a whole nother level of transition. I guess, what do you see or hope for in sort of the next chapter of supporting these phenoms?
I guess I do think we're making strides, like as a society. You hope, right? You can talk about it now. kids are open to talking about it more so than, in years past. But no, it needs to be proactive though, right? Like, let's not wait for the athlete to have the breakdown. Like, let's not wait for the anxiety attacks to set in and then say, oh, maybe there's something you need to talk about, but maybe be more proactive. I still feel like we're a little reactive, and that's better than nothing. But, aren't we waiting for the athlete to, have the attack and then dealing with it? So maybe be more proactive, and also just recognize, what these athletes are being asked to do is, it's extraordinary. They are extraordinary. That's why they're like the chosen ones. And many have been told they're the chosen ones from the time they're very, very young.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, Chris, I really want to thank you for your insights, your time. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time and really appreciate it. And let's keep in touch. This has been enlightening on understanding, especially through a sport that you're so close with, of what it looks like, the trajectory of a teenager into, a great athlete, a story, and possibly a second chapter. And so beautifully done. And thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, Doug. Good to see you.
No matter the sport, no matter the path to the pinnacle, being declared a singular talent comes with a price. It is much easier to pay that price when the trophies cover the mantle, when the bank account remains full, and those that have given of themselves to support you are secure. Some sports are more individual than others. Some skew younger, which brings a unique brand of pressure to these athletes. They are still growing as the suitcase remains open on the floor, waiting for the next road trip. In the case of international sport, for the phenom, privacy evaporates completely as they can no longer slip to faraway beaches to disappear. It is challenging for a young athlete to meet the requirement of being mature beyond their years in order to be a relentless professional. Today, the fame parallels the performance. In fact, it often precedes it. There are many examples of phenoms that have found a soft way off of the mountain. They called for help. They found their own helicopter, and some, amazingly, found greatness on another mountain, one they built with their own hands. I'm Doug Glanville. See you in class.